well we have preserved agricultural landscapes. We're very lucky for that reason. 2 days ago, I was on a webinar and I heard a seal traditional knowledge keeper, Tracy Bono, who is someone who lives here in Penticton. She was talking about food security amongst the seal. She was saying that for Aboriginal people, food security means revitalizing and reclaiming the knowledge that they have around traditional foods. So I want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Seal Okanagan Nation, and that makes our region very special. She is a producer, and she has a series called Quest Out West Foods, where we can hear her interviewing Aboriginal food harvesters from around BC. So we put the link, and you should see the picture of Quest Out West on the Aboriginal television network. We'll be sending you links about all the things we talk about tonight, and that'll be one of them. So you can check out some of her interviews with people around the Okanagan and around BC. Thanks, Lori. You can take that off now. Deep dive discussions are hosted by First Things First Okanagan. If you haven't heard of us, we are a small but active group here. Our mission is to promote awareness of climate change and to work to find solutions for a better future. So through this deep dive discussion series, we hope to introduce you to people from around BC and from our community. We're trying to gain insight into what we can accomplish here in the Okanagan in terms of climate action. And we'll be hearing from a few guest speakers, and we'll also be talking about different things going on. Rather than worrying about links in the chat, we're just going to send you the whole list of resources that we talk about this evening. So you'll be sent links, and we are recording this, so you'll also be sent a link to the video that you can watch again. So fellow board members, Lori Goldman and Sue Kirschman, are co-hosts this evening. They're also looking after the Zoom controls, so if there's any problems, put something in the chat and let them know. Right now, I'm seeing a big icon saying this meeting is being recorded, but maybe other people aren't seeing that, but it's in the middle of my screen. Maybe if anyone else sees that, if you could put that in chat, and Lori will deal with it.
You just have to click that, it'll go away.
It's not going away, but that's all right. If other people don't see it, that's fine. We're excited to have several guest speakers and many people too that are sitting in on tonight's discussion. I know that you're involved with food and climate and agriculture, so we hope to be hearing from you as we talk about different issues tonight. So we'll have an opportunity for questions after each speaker, as well as a discussion at the end. I'm going to turn things over now to Sue Kirschman to introduce this evening's topic. Take it away, Sue, if you can find it.
Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button. Thanks, Margaret. Hi, everybody. It's nice to have you all with us here tonight. We know that large-scale agriculture, which provides a great deal of our food in North America, involves high greenhouse gas emissions from heating and lighting, irrigation, fertilizer, and manure. And this isn't just with livestock, but many of our cereal crops, such as soybeans and corn, also involve high inputs and high emissions. We also know that good soil management in agriculture provides a net benefit by storing carbon. Choosing to eat less meat and buying food locally produced can also reduce emissions. In Canada, 10% of all GHG emissions come from agriculture. And we've been told we must reduce emissions by 40% in 9 years. Well, I guess about 8.5 years now. And the way land is used in agriculture is coming under close scrutiny. A few of us recently attended a webinar on agriculture in the Lower Mainland, and we learned that growers and scientists are already working on the 40% reduction goal. They're looking at the use of crop or cover crops, hedgerows, and grassland set-asides for wildlife and carbon sequestration. And these people were working on big potato and pea crop farms, which is a bit different than our little or our smaller farms that we have locally, like the organic farms in Cawston. Tonight, we're going to hear from 3 people who are working on local solutions and increasing sustainable practices in the Okanagan. But first of all, we're going to start the evening off with a short video titled, "Can Farmers Be Climate Champions?" And Laurie's going to set that up. So go ahead, Laurie.
David McMillan, author and chef at Joe Beef in Montreal. If you know me, you know how much I love farm-to-table cooking. For me, there's nothing better than surprising friends with an unforgettable meal. But over the years, I've learned all this great food has a cost. And I don't mean money here. I mean a cost for the planet. I'm talking about the environmental impact of agriculture. Now, I don't want my work to contribute to climate change. And you know what? Agriculture doesn't need to be this way. In fact, with the right changes, it can become an important solution to the problem of climate change. Farmers do incredibly important work. They always have. But now they can be champions in the fight against climate change. How do they do that, you ask? 2 words: regenerative agriculture. Let me set the table here. We're in a climate crisis. Like many of you, I'm anxious about how little we're doing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions on a global scale. Industrial agriculture is a big part of our greenhouse gas emissions. Our cramped feedlots emit methane. Tilling soil, running huge diesel tractors, spraying the fields with fertilizers and pesticides, all of this sends huge amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. We talk about the need to reduce our emissions and to plant trees to absorb excess carbon. Regenerative agriculture does both. Changing our farming practices will emit less greenhouse gases while also increasing our farm's ability to draw carbon back into our soils. You see, plants breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. Remember photosynthesis? They absorb carbon through their leaves and push it into the ground through their roots. This simple process stores the carbon in the ground long term. So it all comes down to this: living soils.
There are more microorganisms in 1 teaspoon of healthy soil than there are human beings on Earth. But industrial agriculture is dependent on synthetic chemicals and tilling, which destroys this rich microbial life. It turns soil into dirt. In a living soil, plants get nutrients from the microorganisms living around their roots. But they also give to microorganisms. How? Well, plants turn carbon in the air into carbohydrates. But they can't live on sugars alone, so they send some of those carbs down to the microorganisms in the soil, which in turn give back essential nutrients that plants need to grow naturally, which means more nutritious food for us. All this microbial life secretes a glue-like substance, which creates clumps and a porous soil. This very structure of a living soil is better able to absorb and retain water. So, soils with better water retention and rich in nutrients are able to create more life above ground, which in turn creates more life in the soil. A beautiful cycle that encourages more life all around. And that's why we say that a living soil is regenerative. Woohoo!
Cover your soil and move away from tilling. The goal here is not to turn the living soil's ecosystem upside down by messing with it. Maintaining a natural protective top layer is what allows the cool and humid habitat underneath to thrive. Synthetic fertilizers and pesticides damage the ecosystem, whereas organic inputs like compost, compost tea, and manure makes it richer and stronger. Everything is connected in nature. There are no isolated monocultures. By planting a diversity of crops and integrating trees and animals with the crops, the living soil gets healthier, more resilient, and more productive. To help fight climate change, we're often told to eat less meat. Fair enough, but if you do choose to eat animal products as I do, make sure you choose regenerative. Grasslands need animal activity to absorb carbon and regenerate. Holistic planned grazing is all about rotating herds of cows, sheep, bison, you name it, through parcels of pasture so that the grasses and roots have time to grow back. The grazing, the pooping, and the deeper root systems all help to keep the soil alive and the carbon in the ground. Perennials are plants that grow back every year on their own. They typically grow for longer than other plants each season, and over time they get deep roots. This helps to absorb and store more carbon in the soil. Regenerative agriculture improves our soils by making them stronger and healthier. That's not just good for the carbon cycle and climate change. Living soils make farms more resilient to extreme weather by absorbing more water. They reduce the need for chemicals and thereby spare us the high carbon cost of making those chemicals. And on top of it all, it saves farmers money. We can't live without our farmers. They're the stewards of the land. And with regenerative agriculture, they can become climate champions. So care about what you eat. A major climate solution is right under your feet. Don't keep it a secret. Share this video and help the champions. We'll do this together.
Thanks, Lori. So we have a couple of guest speakers. We're excited to have Rick Hatch as our first speaker. Rick is the owner of Cherry Tree Permaculture Design. His company is a full-service permaculture design company, which advises on creating agriculturally productive ecosystems, which have the diversity, stability, and resilience of natural ecosystems. Rick also operates a microgreens business and is active in the Penticton Farmers Market. If you have questions for Rick, just please jot them down or type them into the chat. We'll have a short Q&A after his presentation. So I'll turn it over to you now, Rick. Please go ahead and share your screen.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Sue. Thanks for that video, Lori, by the way. That was great. That pretty much said everything I was going to say, so I can just, no, I'm just joking. That was really great. I think I've seen that video before, and it's really one of those great ones. It, you know, just lays out so succinctly all the principles of regenerative agriculture, and that's a big part of what permaculture is. I guess I'll go through a little bit of kind of what permaculture is and how it can help us to live more regeneratively, not only in the food systems, but in all of our life support systems. So this is just an older photo actually of my property. Right now there's a big greenhouse going up right around here. That's, if you live around my area, you will have seen it in progress. But yeah, so permaculture is was founded in the 1970s by a couple Australians, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. And how it came about was because there was some science that started to be developed in the 1970s around the limits to growth. And they started to extrapolate growth curves as far as human population and consumption, and things like pollution, species extinction, and resource depletion. And they realized that if we continued on the same path that we've been going down, things are not going to end well for humanity, and we'll probably take a fair chunk of the living earth along with us. So they said, you know, what would it look like for us to live in a way where we don't basically foul our own nest, you know, where we don't deplete our resources and we don't exceed the capacity of our environment to absorb all of our waste products. So what they designed is called permaculture, and originally that stood for permanent agriculture. So living and growing food in a way where we can exist on this planet on a permanent basis. And that's sort of been translated over time into permanent culture, as people saw that this design system could be used for more than just agriculture. And people could design things like their homes, their businesses, even invisible structures like governments and social systems, using the principles and ethics of permaculture. And what it really is an ethical design science that aims to supply all of humanity's needs while improving the environment. And these are the three ethics which permaculture is based on. Care of the earth, which includes all living and non-living things. It's essentially a life ethic that just assigns intrinsic value to all the life forces and just that living things on the earth have their own intrinsic value and experience and have the right to life. And of course, non-living things, like our mountains and rivers and those kind of things, the water itself, the stone itself, just recognizing those as valuable and in a way sacred. Although permaculture doesn't necessarily stray into the sacred, but many of the people who ascribe to it will sort of see these things as sacred. Care of people, so looking after ourselves, our families, and our communities. So basically not relying on governments or external institutions to take care of us, but realizing that, if anyone's going to take care of us, we have to take care of ourselves first. And then we can take care of our families and our communities. And in that way, the sort of virtuous spiral of benefits works its way out, and we wind up with healthy human communities. And the third one is return of surplus. So the idea is only use what we need, and anything that's beyond our needs should be returned to benefit care of the earth and care of people. So that's a picture of Bill Mollison, one of the founders of permaculture, and he says the prime directive of permaculture is the only ethical decision is to take responsibility for our own existence and that of our children. So yeah, it's just a lot about taking responsibility for ourselves, and I think a lot of that is kind of trained out of us in modern times. So I know for me, it was a bit of a struggle at first to take responsibility for my own living systems. And here's something that kind of relates to the video we just watched. And, something that can kind of give us all hope is Raton Lal, soil scientist from Ohio, that only 2% increase in the carbon content of the planet's soils could offset 100% of all greenhouse gas emissions going into the atmosphere. And so, yeah, as humans, we should engage with the land and with our soils to revitalize them and increase the carbon in the soils while we're still providing for our own needs. These permaculture principles, it's probably too much to really go over in depth at this time, but anyone can find these. These are developed by David Holmgren. He's sort of the younger half of the permaculture team that developed permaculture. And they just sort of define the principles that we would look at when we're designing either a land-based system or a home-based system or a business, any of those kind of things. So you can look at those on your own later. I'll just pass through them for now, since we're short on time. One thing that we do use a lot in permaculture design is zoning. So this is a big aspect of what makes permaculture design unique, is having zones of intensity where the things that you use the most on your property should be the closest to home. The center zone, of course, is yourself or the people who live on a property. Zone 0 being the house. And you might even have some food production inside your house. You know, you might have house plants or herbs in the winter that provide you some food and that kind of thing. And those are, you know, very important and beneficial. Zone 1, frequently visited. So right outside your door, you could have a herb garden, a little veggie garden, and especially somewhere where you'd walk by it on a regular basis. You know, the more attention you can give to a garden, the easier it is to maintain. And we would also analyze a house for microclimates, like for example, a south facing wall or a west facing wall that might just be prime real estate for growing something against the wall, a nice little microclimate. And not every site will have all of these zones, depending on how large, or, you know, just every site's unique, of course. So zone 2 would be semi-intensely cultivated. So there you could have something like food production, market crops, greenhouses. That could be potentially where your chicken coop is, that kind of thing. Zone 3, sort of you're getting farther out into the land. So you're talking about occasionally visited areas, your larger fruit and nut trees, maybe some pastures and cash crops, if that's part of your context. Zone 4, this would be mostly only in larger land situations. So you're talking about like minimal care, places where you might have a woodlot, gathering wild food like mushrooms, wild berries, that kind of thing. If you're in an area where your ecosystem tends towards pasture, that could be part of that zone. One thing that we do recommend having at least some of in every landscape is some unmanaged, a zone of unmanaged land. So just, you know, somewhere where you just let it go and allow nature to take its course. And that way you can see how an ecosystem would naturally express itself. And that's where we learn. That's where we learn from nature. So that could potentially be, you know, the wildlands, not necessarily as part of the land you own, but just land that's around your property. Mountains up in the hills here, we have a lot of nice unmanaged wilderness. So that's places you could potentially go for foraging, but definitely for inspiration and meditation if that's part of your experience. This is more like what a zone map would look like. No one has these kind of perfect concentric circles. That's just a illustration, but something like this where you have a house, your zone 1 would be, you know, the backyard that's visited daily and that kind of thing. And then from there you just go, you know, down to less frequented areas and the less intensively managed. So just some basics on design there. Sectors, I think we'll go through this pretty quick, but basically what we do is we just would look at things like solar aspect, when the sun hits an area, what are the winds like? Maybe we want to build a windbreak, that kind of thing. And then we would look at things like wildlife that come in and just note where they come through. Some people would have like a noise or pollution sector if you live on a busy street that you might want to block, fire and floods, and the winds might come from different sides of the property depending on the season. So we just want to know that and notate it so that our design can be informed by those external forces that sort of act on the system. And then a big part of what permaculture does is connects elements. So we sort of think about, you know, what you might want to have in your garden or your landscape, and we analyze the inputs and outputs of those elements. You know, what does a chicken need? It needs this list of shelter, grit, dust, water, air, food, and other chickens. And then what does that chicken produce in terms of eggs, meat, feathers, manure, methane, CO2, some heat, and then its behaviors like scratching, foraging, flying, and fighting. And just so you can manage those behaviors and outputs in a beneficial way. So for example, in those large scale animal agriculture farms that we know are so detrimental. Not only are they not appropriately managing for the animals' intrinsic behaviors, so those animals are suffering, they're also poorly managing the manure and the probably the gases that come out of them as well. So any resource that's in excess turns into pollution. And that's why we have nitrification of the water systems, too much manure getting into the water, and excess fertilizer, that kind of thing. But all of those things could be managed properly and turned back into resources. So that's what we look at, and connecting those elements together so that the needs of some elements are met by the outputs of some other elements. And that way we create these interconnected systems that are connected by energy flows, really. You know, we look at flows of energy in and out of systems and try to make things as self-operating as possible. And so just specifically with our climate of the Okanagan, I know we have some people here who aren't from around here, but just for our specific area, South Okanagan, cold semi-arid climate, a similar, we kind of, in permaculture, we look at what we call climate analogs, which is like another place in the world that has a similar climate in terms of precipitation level and temperature regime. Something's, you know, there's not too many. We're in a pretty unique area here, but one area that's similar is actually like Kazakhstan. And they're different in that they don't have ocean quite as close to them, but Kazakhstan, and then there's some areas in higher altitudes in Iran, that kind of area, that have a similar climate to us. And by learning that, we can sort of know what species will thrive here, you know, without too much additional moisture or too much work. And our soils are generally alkaline and low in organic matter, so it just helps to know that. So some things that we can do on small scales on our own properties just to reduce the strain that we put on our systems that we require for life. One of which is rainwater harvesting. Pretty simple to set up some tanks. Rainwater barrels are nice, but hopefully bigger tanks, because when we do get rain, you know, it's nice to catch it all and use it over a long dry spell. And actually, it's amazing when you calculate how much rain sheds off one hard surface like a roof. There's a great book actually by Rob and Michelle Avis called Essential Rainwater Harvesting. Gray water, reusing the water from things like bathing and laundry to water your perennial trees and crops. Not necessarily appropriate for vegetable gardens, but really good for your perennial areas. And that can be put in a new build or retrofitted. Oh, I think I'm missing something here. Is there a chat? Oh, do you have any suggestions for where to find real rainwater tanks? From Ella. You know, I see them when I drive by Andrew Sherritt's along Duncan there. So I know they have them. You could repurpose a septic tank. I'm using IBC totes, those cubic totes, and they're 250 gallons or 1,000 liters, and they can be plumbed together. Other than that, I don't know. I'm sure they're available, but yeah, on $1 per gallon basis, it does seem like the totes are a good value. Just have to get ones that are food grade or haven't had anything too toxic in them. Just a sample of a gray water system. Oh shoot, I know I'm getting past my time here. This is just a diagram of some different options for gray water, which is just so beneficial. I think everyone should look into that. It's all easy to find online. So I'll just kind of zoom through it. Whoops. Okay. Water efficient gardening techniques. Something like wicking beds, where you build a impervious system and then the water is wicked up from below. Extremely water efficient. There's lots of designs for those online. Something like aquaponics, which does require electricity, but acts as sort of a closed loop system. As long as you feed the fish, the fish waste then nitrifies and feeds the plants, which then the plants clean the water for the fish. There's some diagrams of aquaponic systems, photos. Strategies for gardens, for water efficiency, things like drip irrigation. So, that's pretty common nowadays, but some people are still using overhead sprinklers, and a lot of that water is just evaporating into the sky. So if we can use drip, and also, of course, my next slide will be about mulch. Drip systems and mulch will help reduce the water needs a lot, and also planting things as close together as they'll tolerate will sort of reduce the need of irrigating a large area, and also efficiently use your space. So strategies for gardens, you see here on this top photo, this guy's planting this nice round mandala garden with straw, using straw as mulch. And this mulch, like we saw in that video, provides food for soil organisms and also retains and slowly releases moisture, prevents erosion. So when rain hits the soil, it doesn't run off your land. And just a small list of good materials for garden mulch there. Anything's good. I would just suggest, if you're going to buy straw for mulching, to check it for herbicide contamination, which unfortunately is becoming more common with straw. Sheet mulching, rather than digging out your sod if you're going to start a garden, highly recommend just smothering the lawn with cardboard and then adding compost and mulch over top. There's a few different strategies for that, but really great way to save yourself some effort. For one thing, digging out sod is a lot of work and heavy on the back, and then you have to find somewhere to put it. So it's a great thing to do, is just to sheet mulch it, we would call it, also known as lasagna gardening. And strategies for orchards, best, cheapest water storage is just in the soil. So using passive design to harvest rainwater before it runs off your land. So earthworks, we would use like swales. Swale is like a ditch on contour, a berm and basin, we would call it, another name for it. And that water can then run into ponds, using hard surface runoff to feed those ponds, which then can be used for irrigation later in the dry season. And planting polycultures on contour. Polycultures just means more than one plant, a diverse group of plants planted together. And that adds to biodiversity and also avoids the problems of one pest coming into a block of apples and just finding a perfect spot for an apple pest to just thrive, right? With no predators and no other plants there to kind of confuse it. So this is a cross section of a swale. And any concerns, Christy? Thank you. Any concerns building swales / hugel beds on contour on steeper slopes? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, 25%. I think there's you can quote me. You can't quote me on this because I'm not totally sure, but I think there is a rule of thumb. I think it's 14 or 17%, that anything above that you don't want to add swales. And I think that's because, yeah, you're gonna essentially, like you see here, water's gonna collect here, and that could create an unstable situation, especially on a bench, west bench or Naramata bench, where we have potentially loose silt and unstable soils. So you're gonna wanna probably just use rooted plants and mulching to kind of tie the soil together. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up. I think I'm almost done here. This is talking about possibly using windbreaks to reduce evaporation, choosing climate appropriate species, and encouraging succession in your soil. Generally, what we need here is more fungi in terms of a fungi-bacterial ratio. And that will, using things like mycorrhizal inoculant, compost, and compost teas will help move us further in succession to, like an old growth forest kind of extremely mature soil. Diversity is resilience. So we talked about that already. And we won't go too much into heating and cooling because this is about food. So, and recommended resources, you guys can get this on the recording, just some books and online resources that I highly recommend for not all related to permaculture, but mostly about food growing and design. Okay, I'm going to wrap up. And Meredith asked, do you think major industrial farms could adopt the zones for land, or is it more suited to smaller personal farms? That's a good question. They definitely could if they were designing from scratch. What we have now is a lot of sort of existing cropland and things like that. And yeah, I do think they can adapt those. A lot of times, especially when I talk to some of the farmers at the farmers market and whatnot, they'll see, giving up some of their productive land back to biodiversity as initially a bit of an expense. And it's scary to do that. But then they'll often find that later on, the benefits that come from it outweigh the loss of the productive land. Ella asks if swales make much of a difference with the little rainfall we get. It's very, that's, I think it's location specific. Yeah, it really depends. I would focus on the soil first. Basically, if you never see runoff on your land, then I'd say swales don't really make sense. Yeah, and probably just focusing on having all that water stored in the soil is probably going to help more.
Thanks, Rick. I think because people have been asking you questions and you've been able to answer them as we go along, we'll maybe just go back to
move on.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've made me realize that I have a lot of, I think, is it zone 5 in my yard? And now
you do. That's great.
I should just feel proud of it. I've got a permaculture yard. So
that's right.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you very much. And we'll have a chance to talk further later on, but sorry, Sue, we'll pass things over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rick. That was great.
Thank you.
I'll turn it over to our second guest, Rosina and Dylan. They're our owners of the Mullinger Forest Farm in the Smilkmeen Valley. This is a small regenerative farm that practices no-till farming and using crop rotation and intercropping. Dylan and Rosina also sell their seedlings, vegetables, fruit, nuts, and eggs at the Penticton Farmers Market. So thank you for being with us tonight, Rosina and Dylan, and please go ahead.
Hey, hello everybody. Thank you for inviting us tonight. I think we're going to try the video and see if it works, if it'll let us stay on.
Yeah, I don't know if it's gonna work with the video.
Oh, wait. Okay, can you guys see this?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we are Rosina and Dylan. We are farming at Mullinger Forest Farm in Cawston. I'm gonna just change this gallery view here. Can I move it away? No, it's fine. Oh, shoot. Oh no. Sorry, I'm just gonna go backwards if I can. Oh, flash me. There we go. Okay, so Dylan's background, you can explain your background.
I've got about 14 years in the construction industry and 2 years in kitchen cabinetry construction. About 5 years in agriculture. I took my PDC on Cortez Island with Rosina under Rick Valley. I'm a passionate lifelong gardener, multi-generational, and a permaculturist.
Great. Yeah, so we took our permaculture design certificates together, and we've been working on organic farms for at least 5 years before we decided to start the farm here. And in between that, we've been living on this land on and off. We just moved back this past year, but for the past 4 years, we were in the Lower Mainland while I was studying sustainable agriculture at KPU in Richmond, and working as a seed librarian. And then we just decided last year to move back here full time. So in between that time that I was studying, we would come back every spring and plant more trees and do a bit of more observation and designing and planning. So this has kind of been a work in progress for many years. But we're lucky enough to be able to be leasing family land from Dylan's parents. So otherwise we wouldn't be able to do this. Yeah, and so we're practicing regenerative, no-till, and permaculture practices here.
So we named our farm Mullingar because mullein is our patron plant. It is a soil restorer, and that is our main goal in the farm, is to restore the health of the soil. And then gar is Gaelic for close, but it was more commonly known as close to the land. And so Mullingar, the name means close to the land of mullein. Plus we have a ton of mullein on our land, so.
So some of the regenerative practices that we use we have integrated tree range chickens and ducks, which is how we also market our eggs. We get a lot of questions about that. It's not a typo for free range. Basically our chickens and our ducks live in their own little forest. Like the ducks mainly live in their like sumac and apple kind of
Elm.
Food forest and elm area. Yeah, they like to, and so they can forage off the elm. They have cover under the trees. They're protected from a lot of predators. Yeah, and they get shade, and yeah, so it's more closely, especially for the chickens, it's more closer to their natural like jungle habitat than just being a pastured chicken.
And they benefit the trees too, with the whole fertilization cycle. Their waste becomes food for the trees, and thus we don't have to fertilize our trees.
And so being, really permaculture based, we have a lot of perennial crops. A lot of them are still in the baby stages because they take multiple years to mature and to have enough to be able to sell. And so that's why this year we started, it's our first year doing the market garden. It's just on a 1/4 acre, so it's pretty small compared to other farms, but we are doing it using no-till practices. So we're not disturbing the soil. We're adding lots of mulch to add organic matter and to protect the soil from evaporation, which is especially important in our climate. We avoid having bare soil anywhere, any exposed soil, to reduce erosion and just try to keep roots in the ground all year long as much as possible, just to feed those soil microorganisms and keep the living soil systems going.
We live in a valley that is named after a local chief named Karamias long ago. And the name Karamias means the meeting of 3 winds, which should tell you that we have a lot of wind here. So in the winter time, it's just like we're getting sandblasted all the time.
Yeah, even right now, it's pretty windy. We're struggling with that. And so other things we do is we have different practices to help slow the flow of water, to keep the water in the ground as long as possible, which we'll explain a little bit more about later. And also saving seeds is part of a regenerative system. So we've saved a little bit of seeds. Every year we try to save a bit more, we try to get a bit better at it. And it's really important just for adapting those varieties to this climate, and they'll be more resilient to just this extreme climate that we have here. Oops. So this is just some, oh no, it went backwards. These are some of the perennial crops that we have. We're starting to get some yields from our grapes. We got some haskaps already a couple weeks ago, gummy berries, which should be ready in the next couple of weeks. And then we have various fruit and nut trees as well. You want to add something?
We have the ugliest nectarines, but they taste the best. Like they'll melt your face.
Yeah.
But we actually had a nectarine failure this year. Both of our trees did not set any fruit. We don't know why. Maybe a lack of cooling hours.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. It's a work in progress. These are some of our walnut trees, which Dylan planted from seed how many years ago?
12, no, 10.
That sounds about right.
10.
Yeah, so we've been harvesting off them for about 5 years. And so we're hoping this year we'll have enough to actually sell at market.
They're all from seed from a local nut orchard, which has since been plowed under. So they're the last remaining vestiges of that line of trees.
That old walnut farm.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've started noticing, I don't know if it's because they're all grown from seed, but a lot of them, each tree produces walnuts with different flavors. And so we've numbered all the trees now. And last year we separated our harvest by the tree numbers, so we could tell which ones had sweeter walnuts and just the different flavor profiles. It's been pretty interesting. Some of them taste more like pecans. So yeah, it's been interesting that way. So this is our market garden area. So for the past few years, before we started the market garden, we had sheep grazing on it. And although grazing can be great for regenerating soil, the way that it was being done as a hobby farm, it was being overgrazed a bit, and there's a lot of compaction, which also resulted from that. And so we've since then gotten rid of the sheep. But within, the last year, we've gotten rid of all that grass just from mulching with straw last fall. And then we tarped it early this year to just, block the light from mostly the grass. The other, so-called weeds we aren't as worried about. It's mostly dandelion, which we're not very worried about, but mostly the grass, we wanted to get that down. And it has worked pretty well. This is what the market garden looked like last week.
With zero till.
Yeah,
We did not till at all.
And so most of those beds, you can see the line with the slope, they're all planted on contour. So they're going against the slope of the land. So that's reducing erosion and helping to hold a little bit more water in the soil, except those 3 beds in the front that do not fit. They're kind of extra.
Our property is kind of a trapezoid, so squares and straight lines do not jive with it.
Yeah, it's really hard to standardize on this property. So the first picture is what the silage tarped area kind of looks like. In the middle was when we're having some problems with the wind, kept lifting it up and ripping it, and
I was a counterweight.
It's been quite the journey figuring out why people don't use tarps maybe so much here. But eventually it works. The last photo is when we pulled up the tarp a couple weeks ago, and it's just straw there. Except for you can see the line of dandelions on the side here. I don't know if you can see my mouse. That was on the edge of where we had 2 different tarps connected. And the first one we lifted off first, so we could do some earlier planting. And then all that's left is this little strip of dandelion, which is fine with us. And so this is a closer look at what the outdoor market garden bed looks like. So everything is mulched with straw afterwards. And we did add some compost in there with each planting. And in the high tunnel, this is kind of like the process that we did for the beds. It's kind of a bit of a sheet mulch. We did paper and cardboard underneath to smother the grass, and then a layer of compost. And similarly in the market garden, we just put down a layer of compost especially for direct seeding stuff, but also for transplanting. Most of our stuff is done with transplants. So we could transplant directly into the compost without having to dig down into the soil.
We did do a little bit of digging. We used a small soil auger just to make a transplant hole for the tomatoes and whatnot.
For the tomatoes, because they have to be planted so deep compared to everything else. Just, you know, to make them stronger, especially with the wind here.
But it's about like 4 square inches of disturbance, so not much.
Yeah, so very, pretty low.
Very minimal.
And our greenhouse is not heated. It's just a passive, that's why we call it a high tunnel, because it's just passively heated. So we didn't have, you know, the early crops that some people have. And also we were kind of late setting up our high tunnel, but that's okay. And this is just a look at the kind of minimal weeds that we have. I haven't had time to weed any of our beds this year because I've been taking online classes, and I'm also working part-time at another farm separate from here. And I've spent many hours weeding over there. And comparatively, this is what we have. I took this earlier today. We have a little bit of grass in our little small greens mix here. And in the fava beans, there's like a couple dandelions and a little bit of lamb's quarters are just starting to come up, but really not the carpets of weeds that I'm pulling out on other farms that I've worked on. So
with a lot of weeds, their seeds can remain viable in the soil for hundreds of years. So every time you till, you're bringing up a new batch of weed seed to germinate and take over your garden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so eventually, like if you do a no-till system for multiple years in a row, a lot of growers see less weeds, but also there's a change in the ecosystem where you have less annual weeds, and the weeds that you'll see are going to be more likely to be perennial weeds. So we'll probably still have, you know, dandelion for a little while, but that's okay because we actually chop and drop it a lot, which is great for tomatoes too, because they bring up a lot of calcium and other nutrients that are like deep, way deeper into the soil than what some other crop roots can access. And so we just cut them at the surface and let them decompose on top. And it's kind of a little bit of added mulch and organic matter each time we do that.
We also eat them.
And we harvest
Dandelions
them.
are delicious.
So they're not bad. And this is some terracing work that Dylan has been working on our very sloped areas.
So when my parents moved in 2009, the property had been leveled to put in a micro vineyard. So all the mature trees that had been put in place or had been growing in place were leveled, bulldozed, roots pulled out. It was basically the surface of the moon when we moved in. And so we let all the trees that were surrounding the property do their natural seeding and then just let them grow up. And over time, you can see they grew quite big and became a natural resource for earth shaping. Mm-hmm. But they're considered invasive. So this is the first land forming project that I did. You can see on the left-hand side how barren and just desertified it is. That's how it was when we moved in. And so on one of the hills, I opted to put in a bioswale, which is essentially a very shallow swale that you dig down about a foot and then you fill it with a sponge of either straw or in this case, I put in wood chips. And so if you're in a very dry area, the sparse rain that does fall will soak in and then just sit there in the wood chips like a sponge and slowly release out. And on the right-hand side, you can see, I think that was about 7 months later. So a lot of things are establishing in there and putting the roots down to stabilize the slope. And then that's the same shot this year. Lots of elm. I think there's some creeping hounds bane in there too. And many other things that it would take a while to catalog. But it's very diverse and it's quite productive. So we have a lot of clippings. So the elms put out a lot of woody material. And when we had the sheep, we would actually use it as tree hay because they would go crazy for it. You'd cut off a branch that was in a place where you didn't want, put it in the field, they would eat it down, strip the bark. We actually cured one of our mini horses of arthritis just by feeding her elm branches. But the result is you have giant piles of branches. And because we don't burn anything here, because we don't want to give away our carbon, we tend to pile it up and to make windrows out of it, which acts as habitat for native bees, small rodents,
Birds.
insectary birds. And a side effect is that the birds will kind of hang out on the windrows and poop. And then when it rains, that poop will flow down the hill and fertilize everything underneath it. And then we've also got some cuttings of trees that we pounded in, and then we water until they take root and try to cut down on the wind.
Yeah, so it's a very baby shelter belt at this point.
Brand new. That's Mullingar.
Yeah, thanks. I haven't looked at the chat yet, so I'll start looking at some of the questions.
Maybe I can just summarize them. I've been
Sure.
keeping track. There was
Yeah.
one about asking you about companion planting, whether you did any of that, especially between your creep rows.
Our tree rows, well, our trees are not in rows. They're kind of more in
Grape.
wheeling.
Are your grapes in rows? It was a question about your grapes.
No, they are, I mean, kind of, they're against a fence line.
Mhm.
They're in between, there's elms around them.
There's elms, apples. There's so much in there. We have yarrow, comfrey, Egyptian walking onion.
Yeah, a lot of those.
So much, it would take me a while to kind
It
of.
sounds like companion crops just come in on their own. You don't really almost have to be intentional about it.
They can.
They can be, yeah. I
like-
mean, and in the market garden too, this year we're trying, we've got lettuce and spinach and like greens growing underneath our peas as companions, and especially because the peas are nitrogen fixing.
Anytime we plant a tree, we put comfrey. We've started putting daffodils because daffodils will deter gophers and voles.
So we've read, so we're trying that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
some things like when we first moved here, my mom planted stinging nettle because it's like her favorite herb, and it's delicious too. And now the entire property has little clumps of stinging nettle everywhere, which is fine. It gets
so cool.
eaten very quickly.
Oh, that's great. We actually thank you very much for your presentation. I think it makes all of us, and probably most people on the call today, our gardeners, make us think about our properties and our bare earth and our habits of tilling a lot differently from the examples you've given us. I think because we are going on a little late, I'll ask that maybe you can look at chat and answer people's questions. Just back at them in chat. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And we are trying to squeeze in one last speaker and then have a bit of time just for people to put their thoughts together and talk at the end. I'd like to introduce Lori Goldman, who is a member of First Things First. She is a very passionate person who has been involved not only with climate issues, but issues of food and consumption. I know wherever she volunteers, she ends up teaching people about composting and recycling. Her interests led her to research how waste is handled in grocery stores and how we promote food security and recycling in Penticton. So she is going to be doing a presentation just on how we can become a better community with relationships between stores and food producers and the people that need the food. Lori, are you ready to take the presentation away?
I am. Sue, are you going to share the screen?
Can you see it?
Yeah, I can.
Great, thank you.
So thank you very much for that introduction. I'm really excited to be able to share what I've learned over the past half year. My friend Lynn and I took a course in the fall called Drawdown Solutions, Getting into Action with the Pachamama Alliance. And there's another course starting just in June. And you can get that from the link that we send out tomorrow. We learned that roughly 1/2 of the world's food production is wasted. Tragically, it goes on to landfills and water beside the road, and we have greenhouse gas emissions from that, which is mostly methane, which is 25 times more damaging to the environment than carbon dioxide. We decided to get into action by investigating food waste in Penticton landfill and possible barriers between the retail food outlets and the hunger relief agencies that provide food to people who need it. And it started a real journey of discovery for us. We focused on 2 areas of problems, just food waste and food insecurity. The first problem is we know, Canada's emissions are high in the food waste, and 40% of Campbell Mountain's waste is actually compostable, which is cardboard and yard waste, as well as kitchen scraps. And the landfill is managed by RDOS. Cameron Bond with RDOS has been working so hard for the past 10 years trying to find a site for a compost facility. But with NIMBY, no area would let the compost site in. So now that we are they've decided on the Campbell Mountain site, they have to go through ALR release of the land and apply for permits and navigate a lot of government regulations. So our compost site might still be another 3 to 6 years away, which means all of that is going right into our landfills. We first started to look at the retailers because they have lots of distressed and unsaleable food, and we expected that they were dumping a lot in the landfill, and we were really inspired to see what the reality is. So this winter, we surveyed 11 of the grocery stores and found that unsaleable things were usually reduced in price, or they were given to nonprofits or farmers for their animals, or they were repurposed into other food products, like at Nature's Fair. If there are any distressed fruits or vegetables, it goes into food. And really, in Penticton, according to what we were told, only 1% to 2% goes into our landfill. So we were really heartened by that. The other problem is food insecurity. And with climate change, droughts, floods, fires, temperatures rising, we're going to see lots more food issues, and we need to develop food resilience. So we were looking at what it looks like here. COVID certainly has increased unemployment and poverty, and the food service providers say that their increase in requests for food has really gone up. We don't see all the people struggling, but people are struggling. On the Penticton website, it says 14% of our locals are food insecure. Last week, the BC government announced that it was giving an extra $6 million to food banks in BC, which is great, except that it's over 3 years for the whole of the province. So that's not going to buy very many apples or tomatoes. Donna Benson has the medical arts research, and last year she did her thesis on just this issue about food insecurity, and that prompted her to start the Kovic Garden Box program. I will talk about that a little bit later in this, but she started it to address some of this need of food insecurity. So looking at the insecurity, Lynn and I found out that we talked to 7 providers, and we found out that the Salvation Army Food Bank and other social agencies get lots of food donations from retailers and citizens. But some of the highly nutritional items aren't available to a kitchen like Sowen's or the Chestnut Place. So the agency has to get money donations to be able to purchase fresh food. And it's quite expensive, and it's a real patchwork system. There's not one hub where everybody can go get the things that they need. So the agencies have cars driving all over town, picking up things from here and there. So the emissions are pretty high. And, you know, in the final end analysis, are food banks really the only way or the best way to solve insecurity? Many people in our community are researching systems to address food insecurity. There's the Fruit Tree Project and Okanagan Bioregion Food System Project through Kwantlen. There are so many opportunities for working with groups that are active in systemic change. And again, you're going to get those tomorrow, links to all of these things in the email that we send out tomorrow. Today, I can really only talk about the actions that that's us in the community, can take individually, because there's too much to cover. So one of the first solutions is gardens. So when we are looking at the food bank system, it might be hard for people to access products because the places aren't open all the time, and there's not very much fresh food, and it's still a stigma, and maybe people want to garden, but they don't have any place to garden. So one really great solution, which is not impossible, is to share a garden. There are so many people who have space in their backyard, or maybe they have a garden and now they can't garden anymore, and they would share the garden. So there would be great if we have some way to connect people so that they can share. I did that for a few years at Jim's place, and I can't tell you how wonderful it was to be able to grow food when I lived in an apartment and be able to share it as well. The other solution would be the Kovic Garden Project. So last year they set it up, and there were about 25 homes, which means 50 boxes, and then the Summerland Alliance Church had some too. And what they do is they come to your place with lumber and soil and seedlings and seeds. They build you 4x4 boxes. One is for you and one is for the food bank. And you can see in that picture, last year I had lots of little tomatoes. So people got lots of food from me, and I just would take it over to the food bank. They are waiting for people to sign up. They're waiting for people to contact them. They are sourcing donations for lumber and seedlings and soil, and they have city support with the use of a truck and a staff driver. And this year they have federal funds for 3 students. So they're really ramping up right now. The other great solution is Incredible Edible, which is this terrific space by Village by the Station. They grow and harvest food for people to take from outside the fence in coolers for free. And it's a wonderful place, all organic stuff. It's really abundant, and they need help. They really need board members and volunteers to keep this going. And we don't want to lose this valuable resource. So we hope that people will, check them out. More local food equals fewer truck emissions, and it also builds community, which is really important for us. 2 other solutions up in Naramata are the Permaculture Farm Garden, which I didn't even know was there. It's a community garden for learning and sharing, and it's an inclusive space for people to come and participate. They have food, but you can't just take it. You have to volunteer there and be part of the process, be part of the community, and learn to develop resilience, which is so important. And there's also Naramata Slow, which is part of an international group called Cheetah Slow, and it fosters healthy living, community involvement, and sustainable food through inclusive community events and educational gatherings. They have a chef in the classroom, which goes in and teaches the kids about food. They have a self-serve seed library, and they have restarted the Naramata Community Market. Another one is the Okanagan Fruit Tree Project, and that is a society, I think, and they go into people's yards or into farmer orchards, and they help to collect all of the fruit, and they have a community farm up in Kelowna as well. So they share the fruit with the owners, the orchardists, and then with the volunteers and the community, and it raises funds for them to keep doing this so that there won't be so much food waste. Edmonton is one place that has a food and urban agriculture strategy, and it's really inspirational to take a look at it because they are really focusing on chickens, urban chickens, and boulevard gardening for food, and really ramping up all sorts of stuff to make food sustainability a reality. And you know, Penticton had a teaching garden on Ellis Street. It was run by Eva and Merle and Catherine and others for about 4 years. But the city decided they didn't want it anymore. The council didn't want to support it, and they paved it over and put in a parking lot. And, you know, it's mostly empty. So the other thing after gardening is food waste. And food waste solutions, one of them is to share waste. So this is a website called Share Waste. I have signed up, so my compost bin shows up on the map. And if you have compost that you want to share, you go onto that site, so you have to sign up and register, and you can see who has a bin that you can share with. You have to follow their rules because maybe they don't want you coming on certain days, or they want it managed in a certain way. And if we can grow that, we could be composting all over the city, and everybody could be meeting everybody else. The other thing is, Cam at RDOS has free worms, and he will teach you how to do indoor vermicomposting. And he's very serious about giving you a lesson because worms are really special and they need special care. And so he said he would even build you a bin. So give him a call. He's at the RDOS. And the third solution is a green cone digester. And up in the RDCO, they actually are getting some. We don't have any here, except for Nature's Fair has one that they're giving away if somebody wants one. This is a digester, so it's not a composter. It goes into the ground. Your meat and bones and fish and fruit and vegetable stuff goes in, and it doesn't go in your garden. It goes into the water table. So we can't get them here now, but maybe we can see if we can get RDOS to source them, because some people would rather have that than a composter. So that's the small solution. The big compost solution is that Spa Hills is a system in Salmon Arm that comes to Penticton already once a week. They pick up from a bunch of places in town, and that again takes pizza boxes, meat, dairy, fish, compostable plastics, compostable plastic bags, and a whole bunch of other things. And they are already coming here, so the emissions are already being spent, but the food is not going in the landfill, and it's going into their aerobic system and being turned into compost. Nature's Fair will accept their bistro containers and their compostable plastic bags inside, but right now they won't share their bin. Summerland Refillery will share their bin, so if you're up there, you can contact them and see what kinds of food they will accept and what they won't accept to make sure there's no contamination. But we can do more. Penticton's climate action plan includes emission reduction for commercial and industrial operations. So people are going to have to start composting, but we can start sooner because we have 3 years or 6 years until our system is up and running. In Vernon, they had a pilot project because they had a city council that was very pro-composting. They're a Blue Dot community. They had a climate action revolving fund, and they got some grants, and they started a pilot project where they had one bin and they put it beside the city hall. And they discovered very soon that the bin was always full and people were dropping food all around the bin. And so they realized they had to ramp it up. They got 4 bins. And, you know, Vernon is about the same size as we are. They have 4 bins now, and they are dumped twice a week. And they said that people have been so enthusiastic about it. We could have that same thing here because it's only $80 a tip. So 4 dumpsters would be $12,000 a year. Every time the waste goes up to the landfill, there are tipping costs, and it is by weight. So if all of this food waste was coming out of your garbage and going into Spa Hills, the city would be saving a lot of money, and that money could easily go to pay for the dumpsters to be emptied for the year. This is not going to happen by itself. The community has to make this happen. And so a call to action here is to the people who are interested today to reach out, to form a group, to start a petition for the city, to survey people in the city to see if it's a viable option, to do a media push and education, and maybe we could get something like this happening. I see a lot of postings on Facebook. People are wondering why we don't have a facility yet. So many barriers and so many solutions. So what can we do? We can start growing food. We can share, we can enjoy, we can preserve food. We can work together. We can call Kovic and get started growing right now. We can volunteer with the Fruit Tree Project, with Incredible Edibles, with the Gleaners, which take dried food like vegetables, and they pack it up and send it abroad. So it's going to someone who needs it. We can buy local. We can go to our farmers market and support these guys who were here today. We can go to Local Motive, who have their farm and their store in Apple Plaza. We can go to farm gates. There are people who sell their stuff right outside their farm. And we can ask every food store when we go in to stock more local produce and more food products, local food products. We can be reducing emissions. We can be building community. And there is this BC Farmers Market Nutrition Coupon Program, which online says that we have it here to help people who are low income shop at the farmers market. And I think we all need to be asking on Saturday how we get into this program and whether it's running, because that would really increase the ability for our farmers market to make more money and people to buy better food. So we have to lobby, come together as a group, not first things first, we're really busy, but our community to mobilize and get Spa Hills to come and pick up our compost. And what we really need to do is have active hope, because collective action has power. It builds better community, and it moves us forward, and it moves us forward on so many different levels. And I want to thank you for sharing with me tonight, and I hope that people who are here tonight will have some comments and some questions on this issue. Thank you so much.
Well, Lori, I nominate you for councillor, or I think you need to run for mayor in Penticton. we obviously need you in Penticton. There have been a couple of questions and comments that some people haven't had answered as we go through the this evening. Thank you, Lori. That's very, very inspirational.
I'm really passionate about it.
I just want to remind people that all of the different things Lori's talked about, we will be sending you link to the video of tonight's presentation, and also all of the things that she referenced and some additional things that relate to I'm not sure what that is. Oh, it's a very long list. You'll be getting that tomorrow, and hopefully that will inspire you to do more. There is a question from Dan, has mentioned this a couple of times in the chat, so I just want to give him a chance to get an answer. He is talking, he's very concerned about Canada's food security, and he said food production could be done in high tunnels, which I haven't heard of. So Dan, if you'd like to unmute yourself perhaps and just perhaps comment on what you meant. And I think you saw that also in the Mullinger Farms as well. You saw an example. Are you still with us? Go ahead, Dan.
Just a lot of countries around the world that grow under high tunnels. So that most of their food production, especially when you get into tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, they're all under protected cultivation. So we don't do very much of that in Canada. So we have a very short growing season. So we go from May to October, and there's really no year-round production. So could we extend our seasons with high tunnels and bring more local produce to the markets in those shoulder seasons and through the winter? That's kind of where I was going with.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan. We have run over time with, but it's very exciting to have heard all three speakers. So we perhaps don't have quite as much time for discussion. There are a couple of more things I wanted to mention before we ended this evening. We have Christy Tataby with us, and Christy is involved with looking at how Penticton can become more food secure. We're going to put a link to a survey that Shape Your City, the Penticton website, is going to has up right now, where you can make comments about your concerns and hopes for food security here. And perhaps, Christy, you'd just like to spend a minute talking about that project and how people can participate through Shape Your City?
Sure, yeah. There's a couple different projects I can mention. The one being the Penticton Food Security Strategy, which the city of Penticton is undertaking, which, as you mentioned at the beginning, we have 14% of our population here in the Okanagan is considered to be food insecure. And really that means they don't have access to the food that they need in an equitable, safe fashion. And so the city is using their online engagement platform, shapeyourcity.ca, and has a survey open, I believe, till June 16th. To collect your feedback on priorities and thoughts around food security in Penticton. It is focused on the city of Penticton, but as I think we're all aware, Penticton sits within a much larger food system, which brings me to the second project I just wanted to mention that Lori mentioned as well already. In my work with KPU, we've just released a report called Bringing Our Food System Home, and it's the Okanagan Bioregion Food System Project, which is a 3-year research project looking at the potential benefits of bioregional food systems, and it includes policy directions and recommendations for our local decision makers. So you may want to look at that as well. I know some people here are kind of politically minded, and it might be an interesting place to go for suggestions to bring to our decision makers as well.
So, thank you very much. It's great.
I'd like to add that when you do that survey, there's lots of questions that you're clicking, but then at the end, there's a little box where you can put in your comments. And that's a really good place to put in comments about how food banks might not be the best way for sustainable security of food, that maybe we need to have more government projects actually looking after people's food security, or that we need to have more ability to garden on public lands, or so whatever you want. Do it, just fill it in with whatever you think would make this better.
Thanks, Lori. We have, I'll just do one more question before I wind up. There's just a question from Vicky to Sue about growing corn, and is the color of the bacteria black? Maybe Sue, you can just reply in chat, since that's rather a specific question. We also have, if you're keen on gardening and you're living in an area where you don't have too much garden space, we have your problem solved. We have a garden box auction right now as a First Things First Okanagan fundraiser. We'll put the link in the material we send out to you. But Richard Hunt is willing to design garden boxes, come to your home, talk to you about the size and shape you'd like, and it'll be delivered to you. And the money raised is a fundraiser for First Things First. So thank you very much. Thanks for the presenters for giving us a vision of what agriculture and gardens can be like here in the Okanagan. To Lori for all those ideas on creating a better community that's processing its waste and sharing food more equitably. In a month, we're going to, in June, we're going to be having a speaker from Dogwood Society. Dave Mills is going to talk about the benefits of decarbonizing your community and the risks of not doing it. He's going to talk about forming bulk purchasing groups to buy solar equipment and heat pumps, that sort of thing. So please sign up for our newsletter if you haven't, and if you're on the newsletter, you'll get an announcement about that. So this is the last deep dive discussion. We're going to take a little bit of a summer break, and we'll be back in September. Jay Lewis writes that he's got a composting toilet, and I know that Lori has done some interesting work on designing a new toilet at her place too. So maybe we'll have a session just on sort of innovative ways that people are saving water and doing different things with gray water and wastewater in their homes. That's a good subject for another deep dive. So thanks everyone for participating tonight, and hope to see you at a future deep dive. And you got to look at that email Lori's sending out tomorrow with all those 30 different links to exciting things that we can do here in our community. Thanks again. Good night.